hero RB is becoming a much more popular draft strategy in round one. If you do pass up on an elite wide receiver in round one, make sure you are targeting these receivers in rounds 2 to 6.
To me, it's looking counterfeit. I get done with one and move right on to another bitch. Yeah. College educated, she graduated.
All right. Well, today I am joined by Coach from the FF Mediators, and we're going to start with Lad McConkey, who's going round 2 as wide receiver 11. He had a very impressive 2024 season. He was a second round pick for the Los Angeles Chargers at the 202. He's 6 foot 186 out of Georgia, and he had 1,149 yards receiving on 84 receptions with 112 total targets. Really impressive first year for Lad McConkey, Coach. Why is he a guy that people should consider targeting in round 2?
Yeah, Aladdin McConkey in this Charger offense is only going to get better in his second year on the scene. The offense has 166 vacated targets. Obviously, the Chargers added Trey Harris, and they also have QJ who can stretch the field. Hopefully, that will open up more opportunities for Lad McConkey. Josh Palmer has left the offense, and I do believe Trey Harris, though, is an upgrade at that position. They also have an even better running game with Najee Harris and Amarion Hampton. That's only going to make things even more potent there for Lad McConkey. Herbert is a very underrated quarterback. He's extremely efficient and accurate. He was really good last year in year one with Harbaugh, and I expect that to only improve this year.
Yeah, and I think when you touch on the fact that the team brought in Najee Harris as well as Amarion Hampton, they didn't really bring in any big time tight end, right? They do have Gadsden, who has made some waves, Coach, in training camp. But when we think about Lad McConkey, right, I know it sounds silly to just say he's just a guy in the slot, but he can play out wide as well, surprisingly for his size. But when we think about Lad McConkey working in the middle of the field, if those linebackers and those defenders are playing the run very heavy, it's going to open up things behind them, which we should assume Lad McConkey should be able to eat and thrive in the middle of the field. You mentioned Trey Harris, right? He's a guy that comes from Ole Miss, from a play action style offense, right? And he's a guy that can stretch the field. Then you look at Quentin Johnston, who's your prototypical X wide receiver. He's also a guy that's likely going to stretch the field as well. And so that should only open up things for Lad McConkey underneath and in the middle, especially if this is a very potent run game. Now, they also play inside in warm weather, which is always a nice added bonus, especially for a pass catcher. We like to see that. The defense should still be pretty good. It would be nicer if they were maybe playing in some higher scoring, games due to the game script. But what I would say is the offenses in this division have gotten better, and so they can put up points as well. That's 6 games in division with teams that should have pretty solid offenses. I mean, I think Denver, I think Kansas City, and you could even put the Raiders in there, all have a case to possibly be top 15 offenses, which should maybe put some pressure on the Chargers to open things up a little bit in the pass game.
Yeah, and I really feel like this running game is going to be so potent and so, which it was amazing last year, but it's going to be even more improved this year, and that's going to open up things even more down the field. Harbaugh has a real commitment to running duo and other gap scheme runs on the inside, and I just really think as a whole, Lad McConkey at minimum will repeat what he did last year, and that was pretty dang solid. And there's also a world where it improves even more this year.
Yeah, and some of those efficiency metrics, right? Justin Herbert was ranked 8 on his target accuracy to Lad McConkey. His yards per route run, Lad, was number 7 in the NFL, and yards per route run, Coach, is one of those stats in fantasy football that is a metric we really like to look at for fantasy success at the wide receiver position. There's a strong correlation to that and at top 12 fantasy production. And when you look at some of the other stats here, his yards per target ranked 8th, and yards per team pass attempt was ranked 8th as well. Lad McConkey is a stud. He's a guy that I think is well worth the cost. But we are going to talk about a receiver next here who I think if you miss out on Ladd McConkey, Coach and I will agree that he has a very solid case to possibly even be better than Ladd McConkey. And it's going to be Garrett Wilson, who goes in the 3rd round. He's wide receiver 14. Ladd was wide receiver 11. And Garrett Wilson last year, wide receiver 10 in 2024. He's 6 foot, 184 pounds, was a high first round pick at Ohio State. And he's not even 25 years old. He's been through really, really bad quarterback play. And last year, even with Davante Adams, he was able to muster 154 targets, while Adams had over 140 with Aaron Rodgers. Adams leaves. This offense could look different. New coaching staff. What are your thoughts on Garrett Wilson, Coach? And yeah, I know your thoughts, but tell the viewers, why should they be keying in on Garrett Wilson in their drafts?
I mean, gosh, all Garrett Wilson does is produce. Like we said, his floor is extremely high. He gets 1,000 receiving yards just walking in the door every year for the most part. Obviously, Aaron Rodgers left. Davante Adams left. In comes Justin Fields. And they pretty much didn't add anyone else. Yeah, they got Josh Reynolds and Arian Smith and Mason Taylor. But, I mean, what is that really? I mean, he's clear-cut wide receiver 1, and there's really no competition there. That room's more or less empty around him. Yes, we know Justin Fields struggles in the pocket, which will lead, in my opinion, to the Jets scheming up targets for Wilson. Like, they're going to find ways to get Wilson the ball because he is far and away their biggest threat. To me, it's a safe pick, and I really feel like the chances are he's going to minimum produce what he did last year, maybe even go past the last guy we talked about in McConkey. So if you can get Garrett Wilson in round 3, you got to feel really good about it.
Yeah, and I'm going to pull up his profile here on Player Profiler. When you look at Garrett Wilson, right, I mean, this is an athlete. I mean, if you've been plugged into the NFL, I don't need to sit here and tell you that Garrett Wilson is one of the more talented physical specimens at the wide receiver position. He ran a sub 4 40-yard dash when he was drafted just a few years back. And again, wide receiver 10 last year. The points per game is a little bit interesting. You know, he finished at 18 in points per game, and then the last 2 years prior, just 32 and 30. But as Coach mentioned, this is a guy that's had some pretty bad quarterback play in his career as a New York Jet, and he still has managed to hit 1,000 yards in every single season. And when you talk about health, this guy has played 17 games every single year, and that's a testament, right? I mean, we can't predict injuries, Coach, but a guy that's on the field, that's their best ability is availability. And you look at the targets too, right? I mean, I know Aaron Rodgers, people will sit there and say, well, you know, he hyper targeted Davante Adams, and look at how many targets Adams had, but Garrett Wilson was still able to muster 153 last year. And even, and I know Adams didn't play the entire year, but it was more than half of the season. And then when you look at Garrett Wilson prior in 2023, he was practically a one-man show in that offense. He had 168 targets that year. And then in 2022, he had 147 targets with Zach Wilson and Mike White throwing him the football. So this is a very talented wide receiver. I think the floor is safe, as Coach alluded to. It's really about the ceiling for Garrett Wilson, right? We know he's going to be on the field. Snap share was number 1 in the NFL for all wide receivers. He was ranked 4th in targets in 2024. And that was, again, with Aaron Rodgers. We get Justin Fields. Is there a world where that connection from Ohio State with Garrett Wilson and Fields can carry over? I'm not going to put a ton of stock into drafting Garrett Wilson because of that relationship, but it definitely doesn't hurt, right? These are two guys that know each other very well. But if you could, go ahead.
We talk about all the time how Justin Jefferson is quarterback proof. Well, so is Garrett Wilson, right? I mean, He did that with Zach Wilson. And another thing to keep in mind is during OTAs, they asked Aaron Glenn what his thoughts were on Garrett Wilson. He said, get him the ball as much as possible. That's it. That's all. That was pretty much his exact quote. You know, you got to feel really good about that if you're a Garrett Wilson owner. Like, the head coach knows he's far and away the best he's got, and he has to get him the ball.
Yeah, and so the offensive coordinator, Coach, is Tanner Engstrand, right? He comes over from the Detroit Lions with Aaron Glenn, who you just mentioned, and he was serving as their pass game coordinator with the Lions last year. Now, you look at Justin Fields and Jared Goff, two completely different quarterbacks in their style of play, but it seemed like Ben Johnson, who moves over to the Bears, right, is pretty excited to work with probably a more mobile quarterback, right? And there was probably some stuff in their scheme and system that they weren't able to do with Jared Goff that now he can do with Caleb Williams, who's more athletic than Goff, right? Similar here with Fields, where maybe they can open up that playbook from what we saw last year. I know this is not Ben Johnson calling this defense, but it's coming from the same scheme. So it should be a little bit interesting to see how that works. I think the ceiling for Garrett Wilson is my biggest concern here because of the efficiency in this offense. And I still have concerns about Justin Fields per se, but the floor should be very high. And I think it's okay taking him in the third round, for that floor, especially, if you are going with an elite running back in round 1, right? And maybe you're double tapping at the wide receiver in round 2 and 3.
Yeah, and Justin Fields had a good year with DJ Moore when DJ Moore was the only show in town, and I really think Garrett Wilson's could benefit from that exact same thing.
Yeah, I'm totally with you. Let's move on to our next player. This is one of my guys. I've been kind of pounding the table for him all offseason. I'm super excited. It's Davante Adams, who was wide receiver 11 last year, right? In 2024, this is a guy I don't really need to tell you that Davante Adams is one of the best wide receivers in the NFL that we've seen in the last 10 years, right? I mean, this guy is going to be in the Hall of Fame. Now, age is a little bit of a concern, right? I mean, he's 32 years old, right? He's going to be 32 this season. But when we look at last year, he ended up being, a very, very high productive wide receiver 11 with Aaron Rodgers. He put up 1,063 yards, 8 total touchdowns, and 141 targets in 14 games, wide receiver 9 in points per game with 17.2. And that was while missing 3 games with this phantom hamstring injury, coach. But I mean, this is a guy that's been healthy and productive, right? I mean, he probably would have played 17 games last year. I don't believe that hamstring injury was real. And then you're looking at a guy who's missed 1 game since 2021. If you're buying into that phantom 2024 hamstring, which, look, he did miss that time. I can't just say it didn't happen.
Yeah, and there is a world where people would get a little bit concerned about the age here. Like there's going to be a point where he's not quite as effective. I just don't think we're quite there yet. And I think Sean McVay, if there's any reason to buy Davante Adams, it's Sean McVay. He's one of the top 5 offensive minds in all of football, and he's going to find a way to use Davante Adams. He's going to replace Cooper Kupp, obviously, in the way he targeted him with Davante Adams. And Puka has been known to miss some time with injuries because of the way he plays. And I think that could benefit Davante Adams as well.
Yeah, I mean, when you think about Davante Adams since 2018, he's had 1 year, just 1 year of less than 141 targets, right? I mean, that's an insane stretch, even at his age. And at 31 years old, he averaged over 2 yards per route run, and ended up being the wide receiver 11 in total fantasy points and a top 10 wide receiver on a points per game basis. Also, when you take a look, 29% target per route run over the last 3 seasons, the best in the NFL per player profiler. And you mentioned Cooper Kupp, right? We also have Puka Nacua. These are 2 guys that missed games last year. They played 12 and 11 games and were still able to both muster 100 plus targets. There's 205 vacated targets in this offense. Unless Davante Adams gets hurt, right? We're talking high floor with Garrett Wilson. It's a very high floor with Davante Adams, but we're getting an amazing play caller, the best quarterback in the NFC, in my opinion, in Matthew Stafford, and he's getting the best quarterback since he was in Green Bay with Rodgers, right? I'm not that guy we saw last year with Rodgers. I think he's got a little more left than you do, but I mean, the quarterback play, it's nowhere close to what he had in Green Bay.
We talk about, me and Matt, with the mediators, talk a lot about the squeaky wheel gets the grease, and DJ Moore is kind of that guy. Well, Davante Adams is the exact same way. So when you bring Davante Adams in to your locker room, you're either going to get him the ball, or life may not be so good for the entire locker room. So when you commit to bringing in Davante Adams, you better commit to giving him the ball. And I think that's what Sean McVay and the Rams are going to do.
Yeah, and I get excited just to think of the creativity in this offense, right? Where, Adams playing in that Cooper Kupp role in that power slot as a big body. And we've seen Adams thrive in that power slot role. He did it in Vegas as well, a lot more. And for what it's worth, Madden has Adams rated a 90 and Puka Nacua rated an 89. So hopefully Madden's onto something if you are taking Davante Adams this year. But let's move on to our third wide receiver. It's going to be Tet McMillan here in round 5. And Tet McMillan, wide receiver 28, he is a rookie. So there's some unknown here, coach, right? I mean, he's 6'4", 219 pounds. His college stats were very impressive. If you take a look, he's the only wide receiver in college football with 1,300 yards or more in both 2023 and 2024. 32% college dominator rating, had 62% of the target share, which is elite. Now, he didn't have a ton of competition around him, but still 84 receptions, 1,319 yards, 8 total touchdowns. And he enters an offense with the Panthers that really needs talent, coach. And I think he's a guy that could easily beat out his ADP. We're not talking the Marvin Harrison 1-2 turn here last year. We're talking about a guy that's going in round 5. I don't think that's an insane cost like we saw with Marv last year. And I think he could easily put up the same kind of numbers that we saw from Marv in 2024.
Yeah, and like you said, there's not a lot of talent around him. It's basically Xavier Legette, right? It's basically Jalen Coker, who may be the most talented wide receiver around him, and that's not saying a whole lot. Bryce Young came on really strong at the end of the season, and I really think there's a lot of positive momentum for that Panther offense. Just being here in Carolina and Liz, there's a lot of buzz around Bryce Young and a lot of belief that he's really taking the next step. And if you believe that, which I tend to do, think he's going to play a lot better over the course of the season this year, then Tet McMillan's going to have, he's going to have to play a large role in that. His size, especially in the red zone, should have a massive impact for Bryce Young and that Panther offense. Not to mention, like you said, that offensive line is phenomenal, and they will really give him the opportunity once that run game gets going to really push the ball down the field with Tet McMillan.
Yeah, and we talk about those targets around him, 115 vacated targets between David Moore and David Johnson. And again, Xavier Legette, we're looking at a Hunter Renfrow resurgence, maybe. I mean, I love the guy. I'd love to see him have a bounce back. You're talking about Adam Thielen. Like, it's just not a ton of competition. I think it's a big time player, big time size, 6'4", prototypical X wide receiver. And I think he fits well with the type of catches he makes on a contested catch standpoint with his radius. I think plays up really well with Bryce Young's play style. And I think he could be a day one fantasy contributor, maybe not giving you wide receiver 1 numbers, but he's definitely somebody who I could easily see finishing as like a wide receiver 15 or just cracking inside that wide receiver 20 range. And the last thing I want to talk about with him is you brought up a little bit about the team and the run game. When you look at this defense, they're currently ranked and projected by a couple places out there like Player Profiler, Bleacher Report, my own projections from a defensive side of the ball. And this is a bottom 5 defense entering 2025. So they should be trailing or in positive passing game scripts. And they also play in a division with some pretty bad defenses. You have Atlanta, whose defense is putrid. They just spent a ton of assets on it. Maybe they can bounce back with Raheem Morris. I would expect them to be better. The Saints defense isn't great. And then you have the Bucs defense, who's still atrocious. That's 6 games versus mediocre at best defenses in warm/dome weather. All that should play up for Tet McMillan to be successful as long as he actually can produce. I think he's in line, and the path is there for him. It's just a matter of can he do it, and that's a big
unknown. There is a lot of risk reward there, without a doubt.
Sure.
But if that in round 5, I'm willing to take that chance, because if he produces the way he's capable, then he could be a league winning wide receiver for you.
Yeah, I agree. And our last guy here we're going to talk about is Calvin Ridley of the Tennessee Titans. And coach, I mean, this is a guy you have pounded the table for all offseason. I know you're excited to see what he can do with Cam Ward. Calvin Ridley, wide receiver 32, round 6, wide receiver 6'1", 189, Alabama product, right? And this is a guy who's played up pretty well in some bad offenses, 64 receptions on 120 targets. That is awful. And it wasn't for a lack of him just not being able to catch the football. And he still eclipsed 1,000 yards on 4 total touchdowns. wide receiver 18 in 2023, wide receiver 28 in 2024. Coach, tell me about Calvin Ridley, and tell us why you're excited about this connection with him and Cam Ward.
Well, Cam Ward's a significant, upgrade to Will Levis. We know that. Um, there's also not a whole lot in that wide receiver room around him. A lot of young guys have been brought in. Of course, there's Van Jefferson, Tyler Lockett, and some of those guys, but they're not Calvin Ridley. Like you said, 64 receptions on 120 targets. I do not see a world where he doesn't get 120 targets again and catches between 80 and 90 balls. Like that's where I would lay my money. The guy's on the field all the time. He's clearly their best guy. And the bottom line is, when it really comes down to it, I think Cam Ward is a much better player than the previous quarterback. Not only that, their defense is very underrated. This is a team that's going to be a better football team. I truly believe that. I'm not saying elite, but they're going to be in the conversation to get in the playoffs. They may win 8 or 9 games, so it's going to be significantly improved. And I think Cam Ward's going to be a big part of that. And in order for Cam Ward to throw the ball and be successful, he's going to have a lot of Calvin Ridley production.
Yeah, and Calvin Ridley's been giving us a good baseline, right? He hasn't hit that ceiling like we had hoped, but this isn't a normal 30-year-old wide receiver. I mean, he played 5 games in 2021, then he got suspended in 2022. He's played back-to-back 17-game seasons with 1,000 yards, which is a good sign for a guy that took time off and is 30 years old. He also had 1,700 or more air yards back-to-back seasons, right? And air yards is just plain and simple how far the ball has traveled in the air on targets that go to you. And he was 10th in yards per catch last year, 15.9, right? If he can get even just average to slightly below average quarterback play, that is a significant upgrade from Will Levis and Mason Rudolph last year. And to your point, Coach, no established number 2 in this offense. Tyler Lockett, who I love Tyler Lockett, but he's not the same guy. He's probably better off as a wide receiver 3 on a contending team in the NFL that can make a run. He's like one of those like a Brandon Stokely guy, where it's like Peyton took him with Denver and kind of gave him a good last few years, right? But he's a chain mover. He's not a big time going to be a big time target hog. Then you have Van Jefferson, Alec Manor, maybe, right? He's kind of making a little bit of noise in camp. Chimere Dike, Xavier Restrepo, who's a guy you like, Traylon Burks. These are all guys where some of them probably will, one of them will emerge, but it's not going to be a big time wide receiver 2. And likely most of these guys would be wide receiver 3s on a good portion of these NFL offenses.
Yeah, I really think A.O. Manor is probably going to be wide receiver 2 when it's all said and done. And I think DK was athletic enough to have an impact, but none of them are Calvin Ridley. And Cam Ward, I've said this all the time, that he is elite at reading the RPO. And I think that's going to be a big part of this offense. When they sign Cam Ward, they know what he's good at. They're going to utilize that to his advantage, and that's the skill set that he's elite at doing. And Calvin Ridley is going to be involved in a lot of that.
Yeah, I'm kind of with you there. That's going to do it for us, guys. Thank you so much for watching. Me and Coach will probably do a couple of more of these. We might get the quarterbacks out of the way as well as the tight ends. I did just drop the running back video yesterday. But make sure you like and subscribe, and we'll see you guys next time.